Hey guys, welcome back to Fantasy Tips. My name is Julian, and today's episode, I'm here to help you avoid 10 common draft day mistakes that we've all made on draft day. Before we get started though guys, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and if you do want to take your support to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Let's not waste any more time, let's go right into the first common draft day mistake. And the number one draft day mistake is drafting a player simply because he was amazing for you last year and you just want to have him on your team once again. Well, that sometimes works out pretty well. In other situations, it may not, right? That player may not be on the same team, or that player may be moved down the depth chart. You need to look at what the depth chart is going to look at this year. You can't just blindly draft someone just because he was good for you last year. You do need to look at the situation this year because it could have changed. And that's why I've been making that series of videos about each individual NHL team, because if you do have a question about a player that you want to draft, you can go and see what I think of them, and if I'm super high on them, then go ahead and draft them again this year. Another super common mistake that I see is drafting too many centers or too many left wingers, whatever it may be, and then you have a lineup that you can't really play with a whole lot because you got so many centers, then you're going to be benching the same guy over and over and over again because two of the centers are going to be better than the third center almost always, and you just have a lineup that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense because one guy's just never going to play. And it just doesn't work out. So don't draft too many centers, and this year specifically, don't draft centers too early either. Unless you're picking first or second, you can get Austin Matthews or Connor McDavid. Go ahead and draft your first center early, but definitely try to wait this year because there's some really good value centers that you can get later on in the draft. Another mistake is drafting players around their ADP only. Some players have an ADP that just doesn't make any sense at all. Some players' ADP have them going way too early, guys like Evgeny Kuznetsov, and some guys' ADP have them going way too late, like Brad Marchand. So instead of drafting only around ADP, be sure to check out my top 50 players video, my top 100 forwards video, and that way you guys can make more educated decisions. Number 4, and this is a very fatal mistake, is drafting too many players from the same team. Now I have a bunch of friends who are Leaf fans, and they tend to draft quite a few Leafs on their team. Now, while that works out really well for some weeks, if the Leafs are really going off, they'll win that week. But if there's a couple of weeks where the Leafs are having, a little bit of a downtime, their team is not looking good at all, which is why it's good to have a lot of players from a bunch of different teams. So when a couple of them are struggling, other guys are probably doing super well, and vice versa, which is why it's really good to have a good amount of different players from different teams on your team. And number 5 is a really important one, is not understanding your league rules. Are you in a bangers league? Does your league have hits? That makes a huge difference from when you're drafting. You won't be drafting guys like Tanner Jeannot, or you won't be drafting Brady Tkachuk so early if you do not have hits in your league. You definitely need to know that because it's very important. Are you in a categories league as well? Because you're going to want to make sure you can fill up those categories. Do you have any weird categories like face-off wins? You're going to want to make sure that you're going to be able to accommodate for that. Definitely make sure you know your league rules and your scoring system before you go into your draft. Another big mistake that you can do is drafting too many high-risk, high-reward players in your draft. Personally, in my first 10 or so rounds, I go and I draft pretty safe players, guys that I know are going to do super well for my team. Later on in the draft, that's when I start drafting guys who are a little bit riskier, guys who can boom or bust. But at this point, it's so late in the draft that it won't affect your team too much, and that's why don't draft too many high-risk, high-reward players. And like it says on the slide, guys, don't draft too many rookies because not all of them will pan out. Maybe 1 or 2 will pan out, but you don't want to have a team that's just a bunch of guys who you don't know if they're going to pan out or not. You want a bunch of safe players on your team that you know can do super well for you. Number 7 is drafting low upside players late. With your last couple of picks in the draft, you want guys that you know can be top 150 or top 200 players at their peak. Guys like Jack Quinn or Adam Henrique, those are guys that could have really solid seasons. Drafting guys like Mario Ferraro or Alex Romanov super late, like it's such a boring pick, and there's so many players like that can put up hits and blocks, and I'd rather you throw a dart at a guy that could really break out than throw a dart at someone who's just gonna have a boring average season, and you know he's not gonna be much better than that. Number 8 is drafting name value players ahead of their real value. And this year, guys like that are Artemi Panarin, Sidney Crosby, and Mika Zibanejad. Now, while I do like all those players this year, they are going a tad bit early for my liking, especially Zibanejad. There's plenty of guys ranked below him that'll do just as well as him and aren't stuck as a natural center. While I do think he's going to have an amazing year this year, personally, I won't be drafting him at his current ADP. Number 9 is picking players just to piss off your friends. You may end up reaching for a player that's not worth reaching for just to piss off your friend who is going to pick him in the next round. And honestly, your friend may not know what he's talking about. They might not be a player that's really worth owning, and you may have just wasted a pick. So don't do that. Let your friends have the guys that they want to have, unless you actually want to have that guy as well, in which case, go for it. But don't just pick a guy just to annoy your friends. It's not a good strategy. And last but not least, don't draft a crappy player just because you want to have a cool name that uses his name as a pun. Honestly, the best team name in fantasy is I Knew You Were Trouba, and Jacob Trouba is an absolute gem in fantasy this year anyway, so you can go and try to draft him, use that as your fantasy team name. And that's it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. Let me know if you enjoyed it, leave a comment down below, and leave a like, hit the subscribe button, hit that notification bell, and if you do want to take your sport to the next level, the link to my Patreon is down in the description. Thanks so much, guys, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Fantasy Tipped.